The Dancing with Depression podcast is brought to you by CAS-CM, where CM stands for Content Matters, because content brings people together. Welcome back to Dancing with Depression. I'm your host, Adam Turner. Today's conversation started in an unexpected way. Unfortunately, after a tragedy, a Google search, and a TED Talk that put words to something I hadn't been able to articulate for over 30 years. My guest today, Allison, was never formally diagnosed with depression, and in the eyes of many, on paper, she had everything. An elite education, accolades, achievement, direction, kind of resume that makes people nod their heads with approval. But inside she was carrying something quieter, heavier. From the age of 3, she knew what lit her up. She knew what felt true. And almost immediately, she learned that what felt true didn't align with what success was supposed to look like. So she performed, she achieved, she checked every box, all the while questioning, is this it? Is this what life is? And if it is it worth it? This conversation isn't about a clinical diagnosis. It's about expectation. It's about identity. It's about the kind of trauma that doesn't leave visible scars. The quiet pressure to become someone impressive instead of someone authentic. And it's about what happens when you finally decide to walk toward what you've always known was yours. If you've ever looked like you had it all together while feeling completely disconnected inside, this one's for you. So before we jump in, I just want to share a little context about how Allison and I reconnected, because honestly, it started in an unexpected and pretty heavy way. Our moms have been friends since, I think, grade school, right? Allison and I met a couple of times when we were children. Then life happened, decades passed. Then on Saturday, December 13th, 2025, after the shooting on the Brown University campus, I recalled Allison attending the school, and I just decided to do a Google search to see what she was doing. And that's when I came across some of her work, including a TED Talk she gave back in 2019. To which, if I remember, when I told her about it, she was like, oh yeah. But I listened and it hit me straight in the heart. Not as a concept, but as something I felt. Enough that I reached out to her mom for Allison's contact information just to say, this put words to something I hadn't been able to for over 30 years. That simple message turned into a few exchanges of appreciation, which then turned into a Zoom call with Allison, Bobby, and myself. And what stood out immediately was how much her story reflects something so many people experience, even without a diagnosis, even without obvious signs, that quiet weight of expectation, identity, and depression. So while this reconnection began with an unfortunate tragedy, what came out of it is a conversation rooted in reflection, honesty, and hope. Allison, a warm welcome to the Dancing with Depression podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. That was a beautiful introduction.
Thank you. It's been an interesting reconnection, right? But I want to dive in and just kind of start with where things started, right? And how things were for you growing up, because this really resonated when we spoke, my perception versus reality. So for those that don't know you, don't know your work, how would you describe your upbringing?
I would say my upbringing was very traditional East Coast. Lots of emphasis on school and grades and achievements. A lot of attention and care placed on external accolades, things that we could either put like hang our head on or touch or something like that. And because of that, a lot of internal and external drivers to achieve. So very focused on achievement in our house and in the school that I attended.
Absolutely. I think beautifully put, because East Coast sometimes a little more in your face. And so when you talk about that early onset, kind of that foundation, like what were you absorbing as far as what success would look like or what you were going to do based off of that kind of regimen or foundation?
It's interesting because I felt, especially by the time I was in high school, that I was really bifurcated. There was me that is me, right? That really was rejecting a lot of the things that I was being told about what success looked like. Internally, I felt a very strong pull to want to work with kids and to teach. And there was this other side that was very socially constructed that looked at that as lesser than and not something that I should be doing. And I very much felt that success had to do with going to the best schools and getting the best job and being smart. That was a big emphasis, right? So, what was the thing that you could do that would demonstrate that you were the smartest person in the room? So, in some ways, when I decided, I mean, decided isn't even really the right word, but when I said I was going to be a neurosurgeon, that's where that came from. It was like, what's the hardest, most difficult, most like, pinnacle of society kind of job that I could pick? I'm going to do
Mhm.
that and then I'll be successful. But there was definitely the inner part of me that knew that that was all lies for me. I mean, for someone else, it might be true to be a neurosurgeon, but for me, it was definitely not.
How early on, I joke, like I say I didn't mature until my mid 30s. So how early on do you think like you felt as strong as you did?
About what I was called to do working with kids.
Yeah, meaning the opposite of what essentially was being presented to you, which was, or let me rephrase that.
Mm.
How early or how soon did you realize that what I'm being told or taught isn't necessarily aligning with how I feel, meaning my calling, or as you mentioned, that desire to work with kids?
Yeah. So my earliest memory of feeling that tension is when I was 3. So it was when my sister was born, and I have a very strong memory of knowing in that moment that I want to work with kids and I want to teach. And that was when I started to explain it to my parents. And at that moment, right, is when the tension began because that was when they were like, no, that's not acceptable. So from a very young age, I had this sense that the things that I was learning weren't important. And I remember sitting and not again with an asterisk, right? It's not that they're not important. It's just that it wasn't what was important to me. And I
For
remember
you, right?
sitting at the dining room table saying how much I couldn't wait to go away to university because then I might actually learn the things that are important. It was like I was constantly trying to find where is the stuff that matters because it's not this.
Do you think that before you went to university that you knew what it was? Like you said, learn the things that matter. Do you care to expand on what you thought those things were? Obviously, you didn't
Yeah.
think you knew, you wanted to learn them, but
Mhm.
so how did you differentiate that what you were learning wasn't important versus the things you wanted to learn?
Yeah, I wanted to learn myself, right?
Okay.
What am I? What are people? What drives us? Those were the questions I had. What drives our behavior? What's authentic? And I felt like those questions weren't really being answered. And in some ways, the learning comes from being around other people and conversation about those questions, because we can only see what we can see, right? We're limited, and we need other people to reflect back to us what we're missing. And that's what I was hoping to get from conversations at university. And what I was learning was much more like this molecule talks to this molecule that creates this cascade, right, in the brain, and this happens. And okay, but I can't take that and then go, well, who am I? Right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of where I was going to go is like, it sounds like the path was being shaped pretty early for what your trajectory was going to look like. And like you questioned it out loud. But after that got shot down and you're 3, would you say you then kept it internal for a long time?
In a sense, yes. There were times when it would come out because it couldn't help but come out, right? And especially in high school and English class, because we had a lot of opportunity to write things. So I wrote a song of myself, kind of modeled off of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. And that was a really powerful exercise because it actually invited me to look inward and to write a poem about who I really am or what I really am.
Mhm.
And then in a couple of other writings in Spanish class, like I just remember any opportunity I had to try to say like, hey, actually, this is me. It's not all this other stuff that you seem to care about. I would take that opportunity. And it never was heard. In fact, this ties a bit into the core of this podcast. When I think I was a junior in high school, we had to write for Spanish class biography or like an autobiography of somebody, and I wrote it about someone who was highly like an overachiever who was doing really well in school and all the pressure and all the expectations and how miserable that person actually was. And in the assignment, I had them commit suicide at a young age. And that was this is what I turn in, right? Could there have been a bigger, like, hey, I'm struggling here, red flag? And the teacher wrote back, like A plus, excellent use of grammar. Right? It's like, great story. And I just thought, okay, so like, I'm just invisible. Like the part of me that is true is just invisible. And all anybody wants to see is this shiny packaged version. And it was really hard. I had a really hard time that when I was 16, 17 years old, because no matter how much I tried to scream for help, nobody cared. Nobody heard. And when you're in that place of achieving at such a high level, the assumption is that actually you're doing really well because you're hitting all the milestones, you're doing all the things and checking all the boxes. When in reality, I'm not sure that very many people in that space are actually okay.
Okay. So that is extremely interesting. First and foremost, it sucks to hear because here you are essentially feels like screaming at the top of your lungs, I need help, right? And conversely, there's a lot of folks that I talk to that they don't reach out or try to get the help. They keep it in, right? And so there's both sides of that. And I would imagine that both of them are incredibly challenging to navigate, right? So here you are and you're feeling certain things, you're saying certain things, and it's being overlooked. I don't want to get too deep into that, not because it's not important, because it is, but I think some of that is going to be answered a little bit later on. And so I'm going to transition a little bit to a little bit more detail in I've got a feeling that our answers might be very different on this next one, but how would you describe your college experience?
So first 2 years of university were really challenging because of the pressure and the expectations that I felt were put on me. And because I was there to study neuroscience, but with the intention of going into medicine, which was not what I wanted to do at the core of me. And by the time I was a sophomore, I was really sick. So I had these stomach pains and just intense pain in my body. There were days I couldn't get up and go to class. And I went to see all these doctors and nobody could find anything wrong. And they would say to me things like, you're making it up or, whatever, whatever it was. But really it was my body talking to me to say, look, this is not the right thing for you. Like, you're not enjoying any of this. And I wasn't. But I didn't realize that until I took a summer off and I went to Europe. I stayed in Spain for most of it. And I had this naive expectation that I would get a job. Somehow I thought I could just land in Spain and be hired or something. Just not how it works. And I had no skills really to do anything. So I don't know what I thought I was going to be hired for. So that led me to start writing. And I started writing and journaling. And I had been writing when I was in high school, but not like this. I started writing and asking, what is going on? Like, how did I end up here? I don't want to be studying medicine. I don't enjoy my life. And I'm only 20 years old. Like, something's not right. So I spent weeks and weeks just laying on the lawns of the parks in Madrid writing about what had happened. And I started to see, I don't want to do this. This is not me. And then, of course, all the pain in my stomach went away and everything started to feel much better. And I came back and I said, okay, I'm going to open up a school. And of course, my parents were like, nope, we're not paying for college if you're going to go do that. So we compromised into research, but it was still better. And my last 2 years of university were much more creative. They were much less stressful. I started taking all my classes pass fail, which is one of the wonderful things about Brown University is you can take everything pass fail. So it took all the pressure off of the grades and I was able to really focus. I started a second major in Spanish literature so I could really dive into these questions about who and what we are, because Spanish literature has this wonderful streak of magical realism, which speaks to kind of the magic that exists in our everyday lives that we kind of don't acknowledge and I feel is really important. So yeah, my last 2 years were very, very fun and playful. But the first 2 years were like constricted. I mean, it's exactly why I had stomach pains, right? I was like constricted in my entire everything. I couldn't move.
I think it's going to be very easy for people to hear just in the difference in the way you described the first 2 years to what you just said about the last two. Like, it literally speaks volumes. You got excited again, like you could tell. And you still technically, I don't think were on the path of where it was more of a compromise, right? So I can't wait till we get to the good stuff. So that kind of leads me into what were some of those relationship with parents saying, how did it affect your relationships, i.e. with whether it be friends, family, parents, counselors? What was that like?
Well, when you're spending so much of your life performing, which is really what I was doing, performing for other people, it's hard for those relationships to be true and authentic. And so on the surface, the relationships were really good. I mean, not every romantic relationship was really good, but I was in my 20s, so that's just what that is for some people. And there was a lot of the way I related to people was, how can I accommodate to you? Right? How do I mold myself into being whatever it is that you need for this moment so that there's nobody's angry, everybody's okay, right? It's all okay. And so most of my 20s were spent contorted in like a pretzel. And the relationships on the surface looked really fine and good. And I was a quote unquote good friend, but it wasn't real.
Yeah. And I think that that can be used in a lot of different scenarios, whether it be, like you said, friendships or relationships. Do you think that that is a result of the upbringing and kind of aligning with what other people thought was your, I don't want to use the word destiny, but kind of, where you were going to go, what you were going to do?
Mhm.
And so, with regards to like folks that, a lot of listeners probably won't relate to like the Ivy League pressure, right? But I think a lot of us will recognize that feeling of kind of living someone else's definition. And, it can sometimes be in good faith. Like,
Yeah.
I think you can do more, right? But you're the one that's left with yourself in the silence, right? And that, I think, is what we need to realize is you reacted to that. Tell me what you're feeling when I say that.
You just have such a way with putting the words to just distill it down. That's exactly what it is. You are living alone with yourself in the silence. It almost made me cry because I could just feel the pain behind that and how isolating it feels,
Mm.
especially when you're performing. You spend your whole time, everybody's telling you you're doing such a good job. Congratulations. Yay. And then you go home to your house and you're like, that even isn't me.
Mm.
The person you're adoring isn't me, and I'm alone by myself with a person you don't even know or care to want to know.
Yeah.
Sucks.
I attribute or kind of align that with the understanding that I didn't have before where like a comedian is
Yeah.
depressed and people are like, that doesn't make any sense to me because they're smiling and they're making other people laugh. And you're like, oh man, we got a lot of work to do. But at the beginning, I didn't understand it. And until I experienced my experiences, I started to realize like the performing that you talked about. And without getting into great detail, you have not only personal experience in what you would consider performing, but you have close kin that perform, right? And
Yeah.
so it's just interesting because, as you said, what the exterior is showing is not aligning with the interior is feeling. And so when you look at that, like, what is that breaking point for you? Or what happened where you were like, I'm done with worrying about everybody else and now I'm going to do what I want to do?
Mm. So that came when I was in my early 30s. So I had been seeing a therapist for a couple of years. And she's such a well-intentioned person. And also, she had very set ideas about how things should be and how I should conform to be normal and fit into society.
Mhm.
And I tried, like, I really did try. She was like, "You should get married." So I got married and
Hold on.
she, yeah.
Was it literally like because you were again trying to align with what you thought normal was?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I mean, like the person that I married, who is a gem of a human, and I'm so fortunate that I got to know him. So nothing at all against the time that I spent with him. He's amazing. It was at the end of the day for me, it was pragmatic because he lived in the UK, but I never wanted to be married, and I was very clear that I did not want to be married. And everybody around me, it's my I think at that time I was maybe 29 or 30 when I met him. Everybody's telling me, well, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get married. And that's the normal thing. And yeah, it was really trying to be normal. I had a job where I was working as a consultant, sort of, for scientific research and I was bored and I was told, no, you're supposed to move up the corporate ladder or whatever. So I was trying all these things. And every session I would go in, I'm just like, I hate this. Like, are you sure this is what life is supposed to be? 'Cause this kind of sucks. And, there's no amount of money was going to make it feel better. I could mask it, right? Lots of money masks it. I lived in LA. I made a lot of money, so it was great. I could go out, I could do stuff, whatever, but it was still that same feeling of emptiness inside. So yeah, I really did try. And it was so after I got married and then we moved from LA, this place I loved so much, up to the Bay Area, which I didn't like, that I was just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm so done. I'm so done with all the things that you all keep telling me because you're wrong for me. Maybe you're right for you. I don't know. But for me, this is not it. So that's when I started doing my own thing. And then that just really, like from there, like once I opened up that door, there was no going back. And it's just going forward from there.
And when you say did your own thing, can you expand a little bit on that as far as what that is?
Yeah. So I wanted to start the school again. You can see there's this recurring theme.
Okay.
And again, I was told no. Nobody supported it. They said, you don't have a degree in education. Your degree's in neuroscience and Spanish literature. This does not qualify you to start a school or work with children. But I wanted to share what I was seeing. And so I started a nonprofit in science and sustainability called My Green Lab with the idea that we would question our behavior, like question why do we do things the way that we do in the lab? And then once we get used to questioning our behavior and why we do things the way we do in the lab, it's a very short jump from there to the rest of our lives and really better understanding, well, how did I get here? And all the conditioning and all of the expectations and all the weights and everything that brings us to this moment that we can then start to see. So that's what I started in 2013 when I moved up to the Bay. And the process of creating that, it changed me, of course, because I couldn't keep hiding myself. I had to keep showing up more and more and more. And yeah, that was one of the greatest gifts, honestly. But at the time, it certainly didn't feel like,
Right. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? You challenging the process of a scientist, who needs to have facts and data to support everything. And what was your thing? Like, why do we do this? Is that really what it was all based on, right?
It was, but I didn't start initially that way. It started by just bringing awareness to like what even is the impact by being unaware. And that for me is a really important place to start because if you don't even understand what it is that you're doing in your ignorance, then there's no motivation to like examine it and do something different. So I started with that. And I have to say for the first maybe year and a half,
Mhm.
nobody came to my talks. I would give these presentations at universities. I remember I gave one at Stanford and I think 2 people came and they came for the free food and then they left as soon as they ate.
How does that, honestly, how does that make you, like, you can laugh about it now and it's an amazing situation. Do you remember what it was like in the moment?
I do because I got to experience it again recently, so I remembered, "Oh, I know what that feels like." Yeah, it's a feeling of when it happens once, it's okay. Like, "All right, this happens." When it happens over and over and over again, it's hard to keep getting up and saying, "No, this is important, actually, and I'm going to keep saying this message until somebody hears it." Yeah, it was really challenging not to feel like I was wasting my time. And of course, I didn't have the support of my family or my friends or really anybody in this endeavor because it sounded crazy. If you remember back to 2013, sustainability wasn't something that people were really talking about that much. And in science, it was unheard of,
Mm.
absolutely unheard of. So I just was like a crazy lady standing on a street corner being like, pay attention, pay attention. Everybody's like, okay. And then by the time, by 2018, 2019, when the TED Talk happened, it was almost self-evident. Everybody's like, of course we would care about sustainability and science. Which is just funny.
I think that resonates in such a deep way because, one, you were passionate about it. And it doesn't mean that you don't question it along the way. It doesn't mean that you don't wonder, okay, not that they were right, but maybe that's why everybody does what they do because everybody does it, right?
Exactly.
And then you get to a point where some people would look at this and be like, oh, you walked away from XYZ. Whereas I'm looking at it as you were walking towards what you wanted, not run because you were still like, I don't know what's going on here. I use this as an example because I didn't know this at the time, but the song Pink Pony Club, are you familiar with it at all?
Oh, yes. The kids love this song. They know it very well.
So the artist that released it went bananas. It was an incredible song that everybody it was the theme of, I want to say either 2024, 2025 or whatever. And I then saw, I think it was 7 years earlier, she was performing it on the street, busking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, not everything is a viral moment right away. Okay. And that is how I picture this, right? Now you at least, if you're going to go down, you're at least going to go down doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
So screw it. Okay. And so those folks that maybe have something that they're thinking, isn't aligned, it might not be the right time. But if it feels right, it's the right time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I tell people it's almost like a game that you play. Because what you said about, I don't know how to say her name. Is it Chappelle Roan?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
It's so true. I mean, she had been working for a very long time on that song and also on her career before that moment came.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like a game of how long are you willing to hold on for? And so I often liken it to I'm hanging on the edge of a cliff and you start out and you're like, okay, I've got all my fingers up there and I'm even maybe got my chin up on the edge of the cliff. I'm all right. And then with every subsequent rejection and defeat, right, you're like, okay, I've lost a finger here. I'm down to one hand. I'm hanging on by a fingernail.
Oh, yeah.
But that's kind of what it is, because when it seems to me, and I don't say this as a truth, right? But just what it seems to me is that when you really feel something strongly in you, it's often something that you have to grow into, right? It's not that you have all the capacity for everything that you're envisioning right at that moment. Otherwise, it wouldn't feel so compelling. It's something that you have to achieve, which means it's going to take some amount of time for you to grow into that thing that you're envisioning. And it takes a lot of tenacity and courage to stay with it. So if you're in that space, really stay with it, because that's really just what it is. It's literally a game of hanging on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's great to let people know that it is worth it, right? It's definitely worth it. That's fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about, kind of breaking that mold and kind of walking towards your truth and your interest. When you talk about what you're doing now, how would you position that? Are you still walking towards something? Have you run towards it? Are you in it? Where you're at right now?
I feel like I ran towards it, tripped and fell a lot, broke every bone in my body. Now I'm in it. But I'm very bruised.
Was it worth it?
Yeah. there's no end. I'm not even close to, I feel like I'm barely even at the beginning of something, to be honest. But every time I imagine doing something else, or I get frustrated and I say, forget it, I'm just going to take that corporate job, I can't. I just can't. Much to the chagrin of my mother. So, who was repeatedly on my case to just get a job like a normal person. You can see this refrain, like a normal person, which is not a thing. It's a thing that actually doesn't really apply to anybody, that we all made up and then held up on a pedestal. Yeah, so I felt this real push in 2018. I started doing some work on consciousness and consciousness research as a result of some experiences that I had had as a kid and then also later as an adult. And it became so clear to me that I had moved away from this idea of wanting to work with kids in this school that I was calling it at the time. And I saw that the work with My Green Lab it had already gone to be a global organization. It was really on a steep rise. And I was considered this expert in lab sustainability. And that the longer I stayed in that space, the tighter that box around me was going to be. It's hard and it's seductive when you're considered an expert and everybody like puts you up and says how great you are. It's hard to walk away from that, if I'm honest, right? There's something about that that's validating, that feels good, even if I didn't agree necessarily with what they would say about me. I felt like this was really a joint community effort. It doesn't change the fact that it was nice to be acknowledged and recognized after all those years of nobody showing up in my talks, right? And I could see though that like there's just something really seductive about that. And I would have been devastated if that was where my life ended, was just in that space, not doing what I knew I needed to do since I was a kid. So I left, and I felt like the work with kids was actually kind of a continuation or a deepening, in that we're questioning our behavior. Well, okay, when we're young is when the conditioning starts. So let's actually start questioning it from a young age. Let's actually be aware of all the ways that we're being conditioned with a very neutral outlook. It's not that it's good or bad or whatever, it's just what it is. And if you're at least aware of it, then you can do something about it and make a choice or have a choice about how you want to move inside of all this conditioning. So for me, it felt very much like an extension of what I'd already been doing, but with kids. And so I made the choice to leave in February 2020.
Good timing.
The best timing. There's no better timing to start something working with kids when you have no background working with kids, when the entire country's in quarantine and the kids are not gathering. So that was
Nice.
Yep. And now looking back, I can really see that while I felt like I was ready, right? I felt like I had everything, I knew everything. I knew nothing. And I was absolutely not ready. And having that year and a half or 2 years between when I said I was going to leave My Green Lab and actually being able to start the work with kids, I grew so much, so that when I was able to get into a classroom finally and work with kids, I had something to actually offer. But I didn't see that, 2 years prior. And the fist shaking at the universe was intense, Curse you!
Can only imagine.
Yeah. Why do you tell me I should leave my job only to have me sit at home? Yeah, but now it's, like I said, it's at the beginning of something. We're just getting started with this work with kids, and it's profound and it's amazing. And I'm so grateful, just so, so grateful for this.
I'm interested because your early on idea of wanting to work with children, yet you hadn't had the experiences that you had. This was just your thought. What essentially did that mean? Did you want to be a teacher?
Yeah, I use the word teacher because I was 3 and I had limited vocabulary. And it's not incorrect. So what it was, but at the time I couldn't have articulated, is when my sister came home from the hospital, she was glowing with the most beautiful light I'd ever seen up, in my 3 years being on the planet, or that I could remember seeing. She was perfect. And then I looked and I realized that same inner glowing light, it's hard to even put these things into words. It was so dim in all the adults around me. And it was that. It was that. It was how, if we have this, what happens between this moment where it's just so bright and so vibrant and so beautiful? And why is it that after some amount of time, it's not, it's hidden? I mean, you can still see it and you can find it in people, but everybody's got it like held, you can't see me. Everybody's got it held up against them and, bricked up and behind, like guarded. And so it was that. It was releasing that in people. So I would call it teaching and I called it a school, but I didn't have any interest in teaching people like how to read or do math. I mean, I liked doing that when I was a kid. I liked sharing whatever I've learned with people, but that's not what it was. It was that.
Gotcha. It's beautiful, but for me, thinking I haven't matured until my 30s to think of a 3-year-old. But I will say, like, what you described is very much how I feel, where when you see the pureness, the happiness, the not being told to do something because they think it's right for you, they're just themselves. And we joke about it sometimes where we're like, kids are the most honest because they don't know any different, right? And there is a beauty to that. There is a pureness to that. Sometimes it's freaking hilarious because they just say what probably some people are thinking in the room, but they know not to say it. So that is definitely profound. And I do notice that a lot of the things are tied back to teaching children, right? And it might not have been in the exact form that others would think. You've done projects, right? You wrote a kid's coloring book and you sent one to me and I lost my mind in a good way because I was like, what is she doing? This isn't just for kids. This should be in the hands of a lot of us. And we'll talk, I'll get information so people can look and so on. But I also love how connected you are to yourself and other humans, but disconnected in the way that most of us are taught to connect. Social media, tied to your phone. Like I joke now, but I literally don't get any kind of concern if I don't hear from you for days because I know that's you, right? It's fine. I admire it. And I think Bobby wishes that that would happen. And I'm sure in some capacity it will. But that being said, like, what would you say to someone who feels stuck in the expectations of someone else that they didn't choose?
It doesn't have to be this way. There's an exercise that I did for myself that maybe you could try. We do it with the kids too. I went and I bought a bunch of Avery labels, the little, Avery labels that you would stick on things.
Yep.
And I started writing down all the identities and the labels that I had been given or that I had given to myself. This is a huge project. It took me hours and really days, because you think you've exhausted it and then there's more and there's more and there's more. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these labels. And then I bought a mannequin. I think I have it. Well, I do have it, but I realized you're not going to see it. One of those art mannequins, that with the opposable arms, it's maybe 12 inches high.
Yep.
And I stuck all the labels on the mannequin representing me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just saw, like, I was suffocated by them, right? You put hundreds of labels on a mannequin like that, there's nothing of you left. You could even do it. There's so many, I could probably have covered my whole body with them, but the representation of the mannequin was easier for me to visualize. And then I just systematically went through every single one and I asked myself, where did this come from? Is it true? And do I want it?
Mm.
So that I could get to a place where I was freed of some of those labels, which are exactly the same thing as expectations, right? People put a label on you with an expectation of what that label means. And I found it very freeing as an exercise. One, because you really start to see that so little of this is intentional and so little of it has anything to do with you. Like maybe you eventually start using the labels other people have given you, but you as a kid didn't choose most of these. They're not yours.
Mm.
So why are you carrying them around? You know? Yeah.
Can you share 2 or 3 labels that you recall that you had on yourself and then removed them?
Oh, sure. Well, I do this exercise now in all of our classes, so I get to do it a lot, and I really enjoy it. The one that was the weightiest was smart.
Mm.
That was a very heavy label, and we give it to kids really with well-intentioned thinking. We're saying something nice, right? Like, you're so smart. You're so smart. Well, yeah, it can be a really kind thing to say, and it can be a weight around somebody if they feel like they have to perform to that expectation. Ridding myself of that label without in any way negating that I have intelligence, right? But just getting rid of that label was such a relief. And I noticed that, interestingly, people used to say to me when they would meet me, "Oh, you're so smart." And I would be like, "Oh, like, just, stop." And as soon as I got rid of the label, and maybe in these contexts, just nobody thinks this about me, but also nobody says it anymore
Mm. Mm.
because I'm not carrying it at all. It's just that one was really freeing. Another one that was really freeing was the expectation around what it means to be a good fill in the blank, right? A good daughter, a good wife, a good friend. There's a lot of societal expectations around that once I released those just felt like, okay, like I can be in relationship with someone without needing to behave a certain way. And the relationship can feel so much more genuine. So that when I say something or I say I'm going to do something, I mean it. It's not performative anymore. And so the relationships I have feel a lot deeper to me. I'm not sure how they feel to the other person. I'm also not that concerned about that anymore, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I love that because I know when we had talked about it before, one of the labels was scientist, right?
Yeah.
And why I think it's interesting is I think a lot of people can look at your quote unquote resume, right? And some people might be intrigued, fascinated, whatever. But when we spoke, it was like, that's something I did. That's not who I am.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the first one you said was smart, right? Jokingly, I don't get that label a lot, but I feel I have what I consider an emotional intelligence. And I think back to the label and why that's so heavy, because it's all encompassing. Somebody thinks you're smart, they think you know everything. And you're like, dude, can I just be human? Can I be like a superstar in the lab because I studied it? But when you said to me, I'm not worried about the weirdos when I'm running because I'm fast and strong. And I have never laughed so hard in my life as I was staring at you saying, what are you talking about? But you did then realize, well, maybe I'm not as fast as I once was, and so on. But I think that being able to remove that, and I would say, and I hope people listening feel the same way, is that you have some people that you can be yourself. And good, bad, smart, dumb, funny, whatever it is, like who you are, I feel like that's when you've found your kind of inner circle and who you can surround yourself with. I mean, I think that's who you are. You're most authentic. And I love that you found that and that you are in the space you want to be. You're going to take what you've learned and experienced, and I think you're going to affect in a positive way that 3-year-old self that maybe didn't get that opportunity, but will moving forward because they know that it's possible.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for saying that.
You're
I
welcome.
want to reflect back on this inner circle. It is true, right? There are people that we have around us where we feel like we can just be free. And one of the goals of the work with the kids is to learn how to experience that no matter where you are.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to just be around certain people, but you can just be in life and not having to switch, masks and outfits depending on where you are. Or if you do that, it's because you want to do that. It's intentional, not because you feel like you have to. And that is such a liberating feeling. Like coming back to mental health, we find that in our classes, the kids that we work with have such improved mental health outcomes because it's a space where they can just show up. And it doesn't matter what other kids are in the space, whether they're friends with them outside of school or what. In school, it makes no difference because the space allows for you to just be what you are.
That is greatly appreciated because that is the depth of it, is that to be who you are, wherever you are, whenever you are. And I know that that has sparked some other projects that you've worked on. And I'm going to hopefully come back to those because I think those deserve their own space because they are profound. So we'll talk a little bit more, leave a little bit of a teaser. What I do want to get an idea of is before we kind of wrap up, like things are feeling heavy for you, right? Is there something that's like helped you personally that listeners could add to their own kind of tool belt?
Hmm. It's a good question. When things feel heavy, for me, crying is very helpful. I attempt to have the emotions flow through me as if I am a 2-year-old. So, no holding back. Whatever it feels, and letting it just wash through. So, tears are a really big one. Sleep. I know that sleep tends to be correlated with depression, and there's a good reason for that because it is therapeutic. So, if I feel like I can't manage, I just will take a nap. And I imagine it as pressing a reset button. So I intentionally say, okay, when I wake up, it's going to be a different day. I'm resetting the day. You know how sometimes you can have a day and it feels like you've got 5 days in one day?
Oh, yeah.
Not just because you're busy, but because it's like switched so much, you
Yes.
know? That's the feeling I try to have with a nap. It's like I'm starting a new day. Reboot. This one was no good. That one, that mindset I find to be really helpful. And for me, writing is still a really important outlet. I mean, I guess art, any sort of creative outlet is important, but using, and I know that this doesn't work for everybody, so I'm just going to say this for the people for whom this really works, is being able to reflect on, okay, well, why am I feeling this way? And when was the last time I felt like this? What was going on? Am I pulling up stuff from the past that I'm bringing into the present moment? Is it real? What am I experiencing? Really getting into the present of what is actually happening tends to break for me a lot of those feelings of heaviness or sadness or like despair. And then sometimes I just go, well, this is just what it is, right? Like there's sometimes there's good reason. Grief is a really good reason, right? Somebody passes. This isn't a place where we're meant to short circuit it and be like, how do we make ourselves feel fantastic?
Yeah.
But you feel it. You let it be felt. And that's okay.
Yeah. And I think those run the gamut. I think those are fantastic because one, emotions, right? Don't ignore them. Don't suppress them. Don't run from them because they could cause more damage, right? Naps, if you have the ability, I love. It doesn't have to be like, a 4-hour nap, right? It's a reset, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, everybody listening, if you're working during the day, just kind of be careful, maybe not publicize that and so on. But also having the different ways to do something, to reset. And I like that. I like that a lot. So I do typically close out with an opportunity for you to ask me a question if in fact you have one. If you don't, that's okay. But
I have lots of questions. You're making me narrow it down to one.
we'll see how the first one goes.
Okay. I have to think, I have a picture, but I have to think now how to put it into words. What would you say is the box that you're in that you're wanting to undo?
So I think as far as I understand a box, it's meaning what am I trying to form to as far as like
Mm.
being placed in a box? Is that
Yeah, what have you conformed to, or what mold are you in that you're like, I'm done with this now. I can see it and I'm done with it and I
yeah.
need to break out of it.
Wow, that's an awesome question. And I am so excited that I know the answer. And this was not something that I knew you were going to ask, but this is like the quickest I've ever had a response. Corporate America.
Right.
Corporate America to me is something that I have fought with for 20 years. I understand certain things about it, but I say it because me being 49 now, if I was to go back 20 years, I wouldn't have a podcast because I would be afraid of the things that I say and how or if they would be used against me. And I'm not even talking about like opinions of politics and whatever. I'm just talking about, he's not necessarily, you talk about expectations, right? We all put our resumes out there, try and sound so much of what that company wants. We're at a point now where we're told that whatever keywords you can pull from the job description, put that in your resume and fake it on the interview. And it's like, what are we doing here? Right? I grew up with that. That's what I was molded and put into this corporate box. I remember the first time that I had to request time off for a death in the family, a close relative, not just, a funeral that I was going to go to. And I talk about it that way because when my dad, was performing a funeral, sometimes my brother and I needed to be there for a minion and so on. And I told them that I was going. I was very close with an uncle. That didn't align with corporate America. They weren't going to give me the quote unquote, 3 days of grievance or whatever, because they weren't related as far as sibling, mother, father type of thing. And I was so confused. I was like, what are you talking about? Like somebody passed away. Why am I, you know what I mean? So I started to learn there that it didn't matter what was right or wrong or what was compassionate. It was just the way it was in corporate America. That's the way it was described to me. It's corporate America. To a point where at first I was like, well, in that case, I want to be a business owner. That had a whole nother dynamic to it. But I learned to navigate that process. And now I punch the top off of that box, and forgive me for the way I'm going to express myself, but this is how I feel. Double fingers up to you. Because if you don't like it, I can't help you. I want you to ask more, but I just feel really good about that spot right there. So for that, we'll leave it there. Allison, I really do appreciate you sharing so openly today. And thank you for trusting me and trusting the listeners to take your story and align with it. I really do think that it is helpful. It's not about the labels attached to where the education came from. It's not about who was shaping you when you were younger, right? Mm-hmm. These are things that just happen, and love the idea and encourage people to first buy stock in label makers, because I think that's going to blow up, right? I think everybody's going to be, finding a mannequin and getting labels. So go buy your stock now before this thing goes viral. But really that visual of, not feeling the need to align with what somebody else labels you as. It is a part of you. It is an experience, and those are all good. But we're so much deeper than what a label can define us as, right? So thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for letting me share. This was so much fun.
There's a line from this conversation that stays with me. You're the one left alone with yourself in the silence. That's where so much of this lives. Not all trauma comes from chaos. Not all depression comes from disaster. Sometimes it comes from achievement, from praise, from being told you're smart, from living inside labels that were handed to you before you knew you had a choice. Allison's story reminds us that there are many ways to lose ourselves, and just as many ways to find our way back. Through questioning, through writing, through letting emotions move instead of suppressing them, through peeling off labels that were never ours to carry. And maybe most importantly, through giving ourselves permission to walk towards what feels true, even if it takes years. Something in this conversation resonated with you. Sit with it. Write about it. Cry if you need to. Take a nap and reset the day. Peel one label off. There isn't one kind of depression. There isn't one kind of healing. But there is a path back to yourself. And sometimes it starts with admitting, this isn't me. Okay. Again, part of the podcast where don't forget to like, share, leave a review, and follow. And I do it the same. But here's where it matters. For those that have either found us for the first time or have been with us since the first episode, I'm truly grateful for the support. And I've mentioned it, it's working. When you like and follow and share or leave a review, it does so much more than just boost numbers. It helps this message reach someone who might be struggling quietly. It helps the right conversations rise to the surface. It helps bring in aligned resources and partners and opportunities that support the mission, which is spread understanding, compassion, and hope to anyone navigating their mental health journey. So, this podcast has ever helped you feel seen, helped you reflect, or remind you that you're not alone, give that same opportunity to someone else. And I want to hear from you. Tell me what you want to hear more of. If you want to hear more personal stories, coping strategies, insights, solo reflections, this space is for all of us. So tell me what would serve you best, and I'll do my best to deliver. My inbox is always open. You can reach me anytime at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. And remember, when it comes to depression, take the lead. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Dancing with Depression. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, which is often used to describe the phenomenon of being able to see things more clearly after they've happened. With that in mind, I encourage you to reflect back on past experiences in an effort to better understand your now. Also, I invite you to share with me your comments, thoughts, or personal exposure to depression. You can email me at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. Until next time, keep moving forward, and when it comes to depression, remember to take the lead. The Dancing with Depression podcast may include discussions of suicide, self-harm, trauma, and emotional distress. Listener discretion advised. This podcast shares personal experiences and is not a substitute for professional mental health care. If you need immediate support, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. For non-crisis help and resources, contact NAMI at 1-800-950-6264.